Chapter 24. Stone Cold Sunday Brunch. Back in the familiar confines of his Brooklyn apartment, Joey lied awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. It was the eve of his big match, the one he had dreamed of his whole life, the World Wrestling Heavyweight Championship. He thought all the way back to the 5th grade and his very first opponent, or opponents. It was advertised to be a tag team match, him and Scally versus the ruthless Parasimo twins. And the arena was Jimmy Price's backyard. Price, a fellow St. Thomas Aquinas alumni, had even supplied a few beat-up mattresses that were placed together on the ground, creating a makeshift ring. When the generous host dinged a cowbell with a spoon from his mother's kitchen, Scally, leading things off, charged into the wrestling fray like a rabies-infested banshee. Of course, one hit from one of the Parasimos drove the scrawny imp right back toward Joey, where he immediately tagged out, never tagging the scaredy cat back. The oversized 11-year-old went on to defeat both Parasimos single-handedly, and Joeylicious was officially born. Scally never wrestled again. "I've always been a nobody, but it doesn't matter," Joey began, seemingly to himself. "It doesn't matter if I lose this fight. It doesn't matter if this guy opens my head either. All I want to do is get in a couple of signature moves." Scally lied in the same bed, listening intently to his lifelong friend. It was clear that they had buried the hatchet, to some extent at least, and now the loyal menace was back by his side, literally and figuratively. "No one's really gotten a chance to show their best stuff against Jericho," Joey continued solemnly. "If I can show mine and that bell rings, I'm going to know for the first time in my life that I'm not just another bum from the neighborhood." Next to Scally, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat popped his head out from under the covers. It was difficult enough to imagine one grown man sleeping in a twin-sized bed, let alone 3, but here they all were.
"That was very moving, Lish,"
Steamboat said, offering his compliments. Joey looked over at the half-Japanese, half-West Point wrestling legend. "Thanks, Dragon." "Steamboat's in here with us?" Scally asked. "He's lying next to you." "In our bed? Which way is my ass facing?" "Well, you're facing me," Joey explained, painting the unfortunate picture. Scally, unnerved, quickly adjusted his body so that his behind was no longer exposed. "Come on, Joe, can't you imagine Steamboat standing up?" "Lights out," Mrs. Casada shouted from her room down the hall. "Big day tomorrow, and it's after midnight." "Okay, Ma," Joey called back, promising to be a good boy even if he was in his 40s. He shut off the lamp next to the bed. "Good night, guys." "Good night, Joe," Scally said, returning the courtesy.
"Yeah. Good night, Lish,"
Steamboat followed with. It would be a long night of twisting and turning for the Italian dream, but at least he had company. Normally, Mrs. Casada saved her best recipes for Sunday night. That meal was mandatory for her son and his bothersome roommate, and she refused to disappoint. But today, a Saturday, was a special occasion indeed. It was the day of Joey's championship match. Due to scheduling constraints, the perfect Italian dinner was out of the question, though. So she pulled out all the stops for an equally appealing brunch instead. Quiche. And not just any quiche. She dusted off her mother's own invention for this kitchen spectacular. The egg-filled pastry dripping with cheeses and other delights had quite the reputation. Her mother, who had unfortunately passed away when Joey was a teenager, made it every Christmas morning throughout the 80s. They would eat as soon as the oversized child tore open his last and most special gift, and he never complained about having to put down his new toy for the welcome meal. As Mrs. Casada served her mother's masterpiece to Joey, Scally, Father Randazzo, and Anne-Marie, she noticed an empty chair at the already crowded kitchen table. "Joey, why do you have 2 plates?" his mother asked curiously. Suddenly, the vacancy next to Joey wasn't so vacant as stone-cold Steve Austin took a seat. He burped like a drunken Viking, clearing out his digestive tract. "And move over," Mrs. Casada added. "You have all that empty space there. The seating is tight enough as it is."
"What's she talking about, Lish?"
a confused and already agitated Stone Cold asked.
"The only empty space here is in my stomach. Pass the quiche."
Joey snatched the serving tray from his mother and put a healthy slice on the former wrestling champion and current movie star's plate. Healthy or not, it wasn't nearly enough.
"What am I, a 12-year-old cheerleader?"
The Texas rattlesnake barked.
"Pile it on."
The recent brawl graduate obeyed his intimidating hero out of fear more than generosity. "Joey!" his mother shouted in protest. Father Randazzo laughed the harmless transgression off. Have a little quiche there, he teased. Joey momentarily snapped out of his special condition. Oh, yeah, I'm just putting it on a separate plate, so it doesn't mix with my other food, he reasoned unreasonably. Save some for the rest of us, his mother shot back. And are you going to move over or not? Somehow the empty space at the table had gotten even wider, and the real-life table guests were completely out of elbow room. Joey looked to Stone Cold, who glared back, forcing the mama's boy to swallow hard and run back to mommy. No, I'm good right here. Scally noticed that Anne-Marie was looking at his pal rather strangely over the bizarre exchange, and that it was time for him to jump in for the save. Thanks for having us over for brunch, Mrs. C, he said, changing the subject. Mrs. Casada rolled her eyes. If only that were true. Having you over? You live here. She finally sat down and started eating as well. I know, but, he continued as he looked over at Anne-Marie, we have another guest. Yes, thank you, Anne-Marie said with a smile, proving that Scally's diversion was a success. This is all very delicious. No, thank you, sweetie, Mrs. Casada exclaimed. It's so nice to finally meet you. When my son told me you were coming to brunch, mind you, I don't normally cook brunch on Sunday. Normally it's dinner, the blonde garbage compactor explained. Amazing. The best, Joey chimed in, seconding his loyal friend's motion. Well, Joey has his big match tonight, so... Mrs. Casada paused, seeing no reason to explain the obvious. Anyway, when I heard you were coming, my heart nearly skipped a beat. Anne-Marie was truly flattered. Aww.
Lish, you introduced this broad to the Italian sausage yet?
Stone Cold crudely interrupted, killing the sweet moment. Joey's head swung around to the empty space at the table. Jesus, Stone, he shouted, seemingly at Father Randazzo, who was the next live person over. We're trying to eat here. Of course, everyone, except for Scally, was more than a little confused by that. Are you feeling okay, Joseph? The good priest asked, worried that the sudden outburst was directed at him. The delusional Italian looked past the extremely large but still invisible potty mouth sitting between him and the man of the cloth. Huh? Again, Scally put on his goalie pads. He's just practicing for tonight. In case he has to address the crowd, Joey came back to earth. Yeah, you never know, he added, appreciating his friend's cover. I may have to improvise.
Or you may have to crap your pants and you're not wearing your diaper anymore.
Stone Cold retorted, poking fun once more. Joey gave his wisecracking hero a pleading look to chill out.
What?
Stone Cold warned before laughing it off. He dove back into his quiche, finally leaving his tormented conjurer alone. Dismissing her son's odd behavior, Mrs. Casada sensed an opening to move the table conversation along. Anne-Marie, Joey mentioned you have a little girl. Yes, Veronica, Anne-Marie shared happily. She's 4. I insist you bring her for dinner next week. That's so nice of you. Will she be attending the... No, not tonight, Anne-Marie exclaimed. That would be too much excitement for her. I left her with my mother. Mrs. Casada nodded pleasantly. I see. The young lady was already a keeper in her mind. She would pray for her son not to screw things up, several times a day if she had to. Scally, realizing that he hadn't yet added any of his usual bitter spice to the meal, figured it was time to stir the pot. Father, I just realized you didn't say grace, he teased. Okay, only a minor stirring. He was obviously on his best behavior. Yeah, Padre. You're slipping, Joey added, following his friend's mischievous lead. His mother immediately smacked him upside the head. Ow, watch the hair, the brunette with the L'Oreal highlights cried. Respect, huh? His mother warned, putting the kibosh on any more silliness. Stone Cold shoved Joey across the kitchen. So much for kiboshes. Mrs. Casada looked at her hand as if she had done the shoving herself, and didn't realize her own strength. Did I just do that? She seriously wondered. Scally hid a laugh behind his fork. He's practicing for tonight, he then offered. His final kick save and a beaut. Chapter 25. David Coverdale's Bonsai Tree. Joey, wearing brand new Adidas sweats and carrying a brand new Adidas sports bag, exited his apartment building with Scally. The Italian dream, having received one half of his big payday up front, was financially flush for once in his life. Hence, the spending spree on the new duds. He was even able to pay off the balance on the 2 high-end but damaged suits he had been forced to purchase, thanks to the antics of imaginary Ric Flair. When he got the second half of his pay, he was going to look into a new Honda Civic for his mom, something romantic for Anne-Marie, a toy that had nothing to do with wrestling for Veronica, and a generous donation to the church for Father Randazzo. What his sideline manager was going to do with his 15%, yes, he was still getting paid, was anyone's guess. But there were quite a few delinquent bar tabs around the neighborhood that would have to be dealt with. Regardless, these were good problems to have now that both freeloaders had some change in their pocket, and none of that was even on their mind currently. They had just split up and were heading confidently in opposite directions. Joey halted and turned back. "Where are you going?" "The arena's this way," he said as he pointed. "We have to make a stop first," Scally explained. "What stop?" "We have to get going. I agreed to take a back seat to your guest manager, so now you owe me a favor." "What favor?" Joey asked hesitantly. He knew he was still in hot water with his little friend, but he had hoped it would cool off naturally. Chris Jericho enjoyed a brunch of his own on the deck of a luxury yacht as he sailed the East River with David Coverdale, the famed lead singer of Whitesnake. The wannabe Brit and the real deal Brit, who could pass as twins if it wasn't for the 20-year age gap, drank mimosas with their tomato egg white omelets. It was obvious that Coverdale was the true inspiration for the champ's recent persona transplant, and it was for good reason. The iconic frontman had recently saved Jericho's life, scaling a mountain on their way to a secret Buddhist temple in Yangon, the former capital of Myanmar. The champ, who was a less experienced climber, stepped on a loose rock and slipped. Before he could even think to grab onto something, Coverdale had grabbed him. Then, quite miraculously, the 167-pound singer lifted the 225-pound wrestler to safety. Later, they would become blood brothers inside the temple and remain so ever since.
Darling, I am beyond thrilled that you found the time to join me on such a pivotal day of your illustrious career,
Coverdale declared.
"Anything for my Sir David, you know that,"
Jericho humbly stated.
"I'm just surprised you picked the east side of the city for our floating feast as opposed to the west."
The true aristocrat scoffed at such silliness.
East, west, what does it matter on such a beautiful day as this? The sun is shining, the egrets are chirping, and the sea air is infusing our egg whites with an extra pinch of fairy dust that will surely sate our manly cravings.
The understudy listened closely to the sounds of nature surrounding them.
"I believe the egrets are squealing, but who am I to question my current wrestling muse? Does my accent still cause pain to His Majesty's ears?"
I am a proud papa, my boy, proud as could be. In fact, I have something for you.
The eccentric wrestler tingled with anticipation until his most generous host reached under the table and pulled out a potted bonsai tree.
"A bonsai,"
Jericho exclaimed.
"How wonderful!"
Pat Morita and I found this beauty at a nursery in Okinawa in late '79.
Coverdale began to explain.
It's over 400 years old. May it bring you good fortune.
He handed the tiny slice of nature over. The champ almost shed a tear.
"I shall cherish it always. Thank you."
Your pleasure is my own.
The flamboyant vocalist said with a smile.
Are you certain you don't need to run along? Maybe you shouldn't be eating such a rich meal with your grand match fast approaching.
"Nothing to concern yourself about, my lovely. My duel this evening is with a mere tomato can. He goes by the title Joeylicious."
Ha! He is but a peasant. You'll make quick work of him, no doubt.
"And I will savor every moment of it as I am savoring these posh mimosas,"
Jericho added. He held out his glass, and the proper Brit toasted with him.
You know, I have a special guest below deck who prepared our fine beverages.
Coverdale teased.
"Is that so?"
And 2 other guests that did the cooking.
"Do tell,"
the champ pleaded, all in good fun.
Theo, Joyce, Lola, come up and say hello to our old friend.
The front man called out with the pipes of a raspy cherub. Joyce DeWitt, known for her role as Janet on the hit comedy sitcom Three's Company, and Lola Falana, known for her singing prowess and guest-starring TV appearances, came up from below wearing light sundresses and friendly smiles. Jericho was floored.
"I don't believe my eyes. I didn't expect to see you ladies until our next Pilates class."
He stood up and gave each of them a loving embrace. "Looking good, champ," Lola complimented. "Sounding good, too," Joyce added, knowing what he really wanted to hear.
I owe it all to Sir David,
he admitted.
And there he goes again, on his own.
Coverdale sang full out. They all cackled at the vocalist's silly play on his own most famous lyric. I hate it when I miss the punchline, a vaguely familiar voice announced. They all turned to America's favorite bartender, who was wearing his customary white jacket and black bow tie as he approached with fresh mimosas on a tray. This was, of course, Theodore William Lange, who played Isaac on The Love Boat.
Theo, my boy,
Jericho shouted excitedly. Good to see you too, Christopher, Theo said with equal aplomb. It's been a minute.
Christoph,
Coverdale interrupted, correcting their mutual friend. Oh, my bad. The famous bartender extended his tray. Have another, Christoph. Christoph took another mimosa with a smile.
Please, everyone, food, drink, all that you desire.
The gifted singer offered with open arms stretched to the heavens.
Here, here,
Jericho concurred. Joey and Scally leaned against a parked car as they waited outside the former addiction facility of the rapid-firing sex machine. The lucky wrestling contender looked at the time on his iPhone 8 and nervously began to pace. A sinking feeling sank in. Even though his manager was sidelined, it didn't prevent him from somehow screwing things up. Making him late for his own title match would just be the opening salvo. His best friend and worst enemy was capable of far worse. Trying to shake off any negative thoughts, Joey couldn't help but think back to another one. Scally had made him late for his match against the Crystal Claw when Brawl was still 6 wrestlers strong. Not only was it the Claw's last match, it was the last time the blonde menace was allowed to manage from just outside the ring. Sick of running out of drink tickets every Saturday night, Scally filled his hidden flask with Jack Daniels. When the Claw chirped at him before the bell, the Lush ran into the ring and started swinging wildly. The ref attempted to break up the pre-fight fisticuffs, but was cold-cocked for his troubles. To this day, no one knows who actually sent him to the hospital. Both Scally and the Crystal Claw were banned from future league events regardless. Of course, the scrawny Irishman managed to weasel his way back into the bleachers of Brawl, but the Claw, fully committed to his work with Greenpeace International, never returned. Are they coming out or not? Joey asked for the third time. We don't have time for this. They'll be out, Scally shot back. Relax. What am I saying to these girls on your behalf anyway? Before Joey could get his answer, Tito Santana popped his head out of the parked car's passenger side window.
Do you know any Spanish, Lish?
The Latin WWF legend from Texas asked.
It's the language of love.
Joey's forehead wrinkled in confusion. I thought French was the language of love. Scally immediately shook his head. The random statement made by his troubled friend could only mean one thing.
So is Italian and Spanish.
Tito countered.
All three are considered Romance languages.
Good to know, Joey conceded, impressed by the former Intercontinental Champion's knowledge. But I don't even speak Italian. Tito was flabbergasted.
The Italian dream doesn't speak Italian?
Who's here with us now? Scally asked nonchalantly. Tito Santana, answered the delusional one. Suddenly, another WWF star in military fatigues and a fedora cap popped his head out of the car's back window.
You need to show these women discipline, soldier.
Sergeant Slaughter began.
Then they'll do whatever you say.
And Sergeant Slaughter, Joey added just as casually as his friend had asked. He turned to the back window. Thanks, Sarge, but women's lib happened in the 70s. We'll handle this. Slaughter scoffed and quickly disappeared back inside the car. Tito followed suit. Scally thought of something that had been nagging at him ever since his client's golden ticket came in. How is it the more you're around real wrestlers, the more the imaginary ones keep showing up? I think they can sense it's a big day, Joey answered simply enough. If it was nagging at him too, he certainly wasn't showing it. Don't you mean you can sense it? Same difference. The sex addicts began to file out of the facility. Here they come, Scally pointed. Which ones are yours? Joey asked, although the answer was more than obvious. The 2 Asians. Why did I even bother to ask? Washi and Seo separated themselves from the exiting crowd as Scally and Joey approached. Washi was already cross at the unpleasant sight of the blonde imp. What do you want? Seo, never one to hold a grudge, was much more interested in the presence of the taller and more handsome Italian. Who's this? Joey was taken aback. I'm spoken for, he stammered. Yeah, he's a goner. Scally emphasized, quick to douse any notions that would cramp his style. Anne-Marie Degrassi. Washi was still all business. Again, what do you want? I want you and Sayo to escort me to the arena tonight, the scrawny Romeo said with a forced smile. It was the wrong answer. Oh, so we're escorts now? The less forgiving woman shot back. No, look. I'm sorry about the old lady panties you found in my possession, okay? If Joey had been drinking, he surely would have done a spit take. The what? Sayo laughed and waved her hand. She had clearly forgiven her little man for his betrayal and was looking ahead to brighter days, or evenings. What's at the arena? She asked pleasantly. Are you kidding? Scally exclaimed. Joe here's fighting for the world championship. She was right back in the Italian wrestler's muscular arms metaphorically. Speaking of course. Oh, you're the roommate. And still unavailable, Joey reminded her. Sayo, undeterred, turned to her female playmate. Let's go, Washi. It sounds like fun. Washi sighed. There was no escape. What time? Right now, Scally said. Now! You said tonight. The neighborhood schemer quickly rethought his approach. Actually, Joe, why don't you go on ahead? We'll catch up with you after the match. You sure? Joey asked. You have enough tickets? We're good. You just bring the violence, all right? For sure. And, at that, the sideline manager and his one and only client hugged for good luck. Sayo practically melted at the display of affection. How sweet. Washi, on the other hand, just shook her head as Joey separated from Scally and jogged away. Good luck, Joey, Sayo called out with a smile. Even if her and her friend couldn't have him, they would still be in his corner. And Joey would eventually need them. More than he could possibly know at the time. Chapter 26. Real Heroes. Imaginary Heroes, oh my. As Joey put on his signature black singlet and red bows in the locker room of Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous arena, he couldn't help but look around in awe. He was actually about to enter the same ring that the Hulkster entered all those years ago when he defeated the Iron Sheik for the title. He had watched the legendary match on a static-ridden TV from his living room couch with his mother and Scally, and his life was never the same again. Suddenly, the roar of the arena crowd, blasting through a door that had opened, brought the Italian dream back to the present. Wrestling star power was everywhere, some returning from a match, some getting ready to head out. More than anything, Joey wanted to earn their respect. Win or lose, if he put on a good show, he would do just that. If he didn't. Something else was nagging at him, though. How could he tell the real wrestlers from the imaginary ones bouncing around in his head? The locker room was currently stacked with both, and he didn't know which end was sideways. On cue, Joey spotted someone that he really wished he hadn't. Damn, Jake the Snake, he muttered under his breath. The former WWF bad boy, Jake the Snake Roberts, came over and extended his hand with a warm smile. As usual, his pet python Damien was around his neck.
Joeylicious,
he exclaimed pleasantly.
Good to meet you.
Joey cautiously shook the man's hand. Is this really you, Mr. Roberts? He looked around nervously in case someone noticed that he may have been talking to himself. Jake laughed off the strange query.
Call me Jake. And who else would I be?
So you're not going to ask me to change my persona and use illegal weapons or anything?
No, be yourself. It's gotten you this far, but if you're thinking of using illegal weapons, I won't say anything.
Joey eyeballed the infamous wrestling heel suspiciously. So what's up? You stop by every big event?
Nah, I just filmed a little breaking the action skit with another legend.
Jake explained. Oh yeah? Who?
You wouldn't be corrupting my prodigy now, would you?
Another familiar voice suddenly interrupted. It was Hulk Hogan stepping in to rescue Joey.
No, Hulkster. He's all yours.
Jake conceded. He patted the middle-aged upstart on the back.
Good luck, kiddo.
And at that, he was off. Thanks, Jake, Joey called out, convinced the scary man was the real thing. He had to be. Otherwise, the delusional Brooklynite would be dealing with some kind of devastating injury by now. His imaginations rarely left him in peace. Wow, nice guy, he said to Hogan, clearly surprised.
Blonde bitch.
Jake shouted back, obviously a parting shot at the giant icon all in good fun.
Yeah, he's a peach.
Hogan scoffed.
So you're all set?
He then asked, bringing the subject around to what was important.
What's the verdict?
Joey arched a confused eyebrow. Verdict?
The outcome of your match.
the 12-time world champion explained.
I'm sure I can guess, but they didn't tell you yet?
No, actually. Honestly, the naive contender hadn't even thought about that. Erica Martin looked over at the challenger and his mentor with Chris Jericho and Stephen Brown at her side. Joey, can we talk to you for a minute? She asked.
I guess you're finding out now,
Hogan said.
Well, whatever it is, you just leave the fans with a reason to bring you back.
Joey would settle for nothing less. Definitely, the blonde legend nodded proudly.
I'll see you around, Lish.
Just as proudly, the Italian Dream watched his lifelong hero exit stage left. He then took a deep breath before walking over to finally learn his fate. As Joey approached, Erica could see the determination in his face, and was quite impressed for once. Are you familiar with the champ's finishing move, she asked? The Lion Tamer or the Code Breaker? The Brawl graduate had studied his opponent well.
The Judas effect, darling,
Jericho answered with his so-called British accent. The former Ayatollah of rock and rolla had actually considered denouncing his American citizenship before the match. That's how committed he was. The others thought he should just be committed. To a home with white walls. I'm familiar with it, Joey said, ignoring the eccentric wrestler. Lish, you'll get a chance to do your thing, but in the end, Brown's sentence was cut short by the challenger's raised hand. I lose. I kinda figured that. What other way could a wrestling Rocky story end? Part 1 at least. Erica appreciated Joey's understanding. You're a good sport,
I'll let you know when it's time, Joseph.
Jericho added.
Just don't get too rambunctious out there.
I understand, the courteous Brooklynite reiterated. At that, Erica, Jericho, and Brown continued to talk amongst themselves. Joey felt a slight letdown as reality set in. Fortunately, he turned and found Lou Rosati, Una Grenada, Milkshake, and Tiny all standing behind him wearing tuxedos. So is someone getting married, or did someone die? He quipped. Who wears a tux to a funeral? Una Grenada poked back. Liberace's funeral. Joey had a point there. Tiny got us a corporate suite through his Wall Street job, Milkshake announced. We'll be watching in style. Nice, the Italian Dream responded emphatically. He was almost jealous. And all you can eat? Of course, Tiny answered. He would show the MSG staff a whole new meaning to those very words. That's great, Tiny. Just don't choke on anything in the excitement, Joey warned. Lou looked around the locker room. Where's your guest manager? We were hoping we could meet him. Good point, the wrestling contender admitted. He looked back toward the all-knowing executive. Erica, have you seen Stallone? Not yet, but he'll be here, she answered. Are you sure? It's getting close to match time. Of course I'm sure. Joey thought of a quick backup plan that would make everyone happy, or so he thought. But in case you're not, do you think Scally could— No, Erica shouted, cutting off such nonsense at the knees. Joey looked back to his Brawl contingent and shrugged. At least he tried. Joey exited the locker room all set for his big match and was pleasantly surprised to find Anne-Marie waiting for him right outside the door. It reminded him of their 7th grade class trip to the Dude Ranch. He had just finished mauling every boy in his class during an impromptu battle royal and found Anne-Marie waiting to congratulate him on the sidelines. Of course, they sat next to each other on the bus ride home, and that's where they had their first kiss. As usual, Scally spoiled the romantic moment when he tried to collect his 15%. But it was still one of the fondest memories of Joey's life. Anne-Marie's too. Hey, how'd you get back here? Joey asked. I have my ways, Anne-Marie answered mysteriously. Anybody hassles you, you could always just say you're my wife. Maybe I already did. Joey was rocked back on his heels. Anne-Marie, are you proposing? He dropped to a knee and apparently waited for her to do just that. Are you proposing? She responded playfully, pointing out who was actually kneeling. The Italian daydream was completely out of sorts. Huh? He stammered. Then he realized that he was ringless and totally jumping the gun. Oh no, I thought— He stood back up flush with embarrassment. I'm a little nervous about the fight, he finally confessed. I came back to wish you luck, Anne-Marie simply said. Joey sighed. Of course. And to thank you, she added, again catching the confused Casanova off guard. Or for what? My daughter hasn't stopped talking about you all week? Joey couldn't believe his ears. Really? Since the ice cream fiasco? That wasn't a fiasco, Anne-Marie insisted. She just likes to bust balls. The preoccupied wrestler looked away, briefly distracted by the hustle and bustle about. You were very sweet to her, she continued, and you've been especially sweet to me. That certainly got Joey to refocus. You're my girl, he reminded her. Anne-Marie grabbed the Italian dream and kissed him romantically. Flooded with emotions, he wobbled and almost passed out. She steadied her man. Now get out there and kick some ass, she demanded. Then she abruptly walked away. Joey was left in a comatose state. Dressed like a security guard, Mick Foley suddenly appeared by the locker room door.
She's a keeper,
he announced. Joey, knocked from his stupor, turned to face the kooky wrestling Hall of Famer. Hey, Mick, he began casually. They couldn't find time to write a skit for you, so they have you working security?
No, Lish, I'm not really here.
Oh, I should have known.
Have you seen Stallone?
The imaginary figure asked. Have you? His conjurer responded. That seemed to be the question of the evening, and it was just about showtime.
So far, he has eluded our sight,
Mick regrettably admitted. Joey felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Our sight? The two-time world champion with the 3 alter egos pointed to the other side of the locker room door, where Dude Love and Cactus Jack were also dressed as security guards. Although Dude had a tie-dye colored jacket, along with his signature bandana, and Cactus was holding a nightstick wrapped in barbed wire. Expecting the worst, but not caring either way, Joey finally accepted his special condition for what it was special. Hi, guys. Where's Mankind?
The WWE owns his character and wouldn't let him appear in this book,
Cactus explained. But he was in the first book, Joey protested, and we're coming up on the grand finale. He turned back to the original Foley, hoping for a better answer. Mick shrugged, accepting the blame for all 4 of his faces.
We did what we could. Ow, Daddy,
Dude Love exclaimed as he pointed.
Look who's coming on down.
Joey saw an iconic-looking figure approach from the distance. The figure, continuously bouncing a racquetball, wore a fedora, a leather jacket, and leather gloves with the fingers cut off. There he is, the recent underground wrestler said. He was about to take center stage, and a fellow New Yorker of some note was about to join him. Cactus Jack held up his nightstick.
You want me to take care of him, Lish?
No, Cactus, Joey reasoned calmly. You can holster the nightstick. He's on our side. Chapter 27. For All the Marbles With Frank Stallone? The main event was about to begin, and the sold-out arena crowd was rocking. Of course, Madison Square Garden had hosted more than its share of renowned sporting events over the many years of its existence. From the Rangers to the Knicks, to Ali versus Frazier, to Joeylicious. Okay, to be fair, the Italian Dream still had some work to do. It would take a monumental feat on his part to even be mentioned in the same breath as the Zacchini brothers, a human cannonball act from the defunct Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. But this was America, damn it, and anything was possible, wasn't it? Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone, the long-standing TV broadcast team, set the stage for the wrestling extravaganza. And we're ready for our main event, shouted Ross. The crowd can barely contain themselves as one of their own is about to get his shot at the title. Joeylicious is about to get his ass kicked, countered Schiavone. That's what he's about to get. We'll see. The ring announcer, Michael Buffer, returning from his narrow escape from the Severian High School fiasco, brought the microphone up to his lips. Ladies and gentlemen, this next match is for it all, he began.
Let's get ready to rumble!
The crowd let him know that they were, and the arena shook. Michael Buffer basked in the fan jubilee. First up, the challenger, here to bring the violence for you all tonight. Mrs. Casada, sitting between Father Randazzo and Anne-Marie in the stands, grabbed both of them by the hand and squeezed for dear life. She could hardly believe, after all these years, that her son wasn't a complete loser. Buffer continued. At 5 feet 10 inches and a half, weighing at almost 200 pounds, from Brooklyn, New York, the man of the hour, the tower of power, too sweet to be sour. He'll never cower even when he's feeling dour. Come on, Buffer, Schiavone bemoaned. I think we get the point. The Italian Dream, the famed announcer went on. How many nicknames does this guy have? Schiavone griped further. Joeylicious, Buffer finally concluded with a grand exclamation. The crowd responded with equal cheers and jeers as Joeylicious proudly made his way to the ring. Scally, Washi, and Seo, sitting in the upper level, naturally joined the cheering section. The sideline manager could barely contain himself as he jumped up and down for his best bud and one and only client. Did he spill even a drop of beer from his large styrofoam cup? Of course not. "Yeah, baby," he screamed at the top of his puny lungs. "Take it to him, Licious. No mercy." A Jericho fan, sitting behind the blonde menace, took umbrage with his verbosity. "Sit down, loser. Joey Bag of Donuts has no shot." Scally quickly turned with fire in his eyes. "Don't make me put down my beer." "I wouldn't worry," Washi said deadpan to the Jericho fan. "He's never putting down that beer." From Tiny's corporate suite, the Brawl contingent also cheered insanely for one of their own. The mountain of flesh, who crushed it in the stock market when he wasn't getting crushed in the ring, was already covered in wing sauce. Joeylicious climbed into the world-famous ring and danced around with his arms raised. It sounds like the challenger is getting a mixed response from this capacity crowd. Ross reported as if the fans watching from home couldn't hear for themselves. "I must admit, I'm surprised." "I'm not," Schiavone retorted. "He did set off a live grenade during his last televised match. I believe that was his only televised match." "Exactly. His 15 minutes are up and our sophisticated audience members know it." Joeylicious ended his ring celebration next to Michael Buffer. "Sorry about the grenade," he said sincerely. Buffer, holding no hard feelings, waved the minor transgression away. "I managed to duck behind Emmanuel Lewis before it went off." The recent Brawl graduate was understandably taken aback. "Emmanuel Lewis was there that night? He's fine, but he took some shrapnel." "Wait, how did you duck behind someone who's 4 feet tall?" Buffer brought his attention back to the mic. "And we have a special guest who will join Joeylicious in his corner." Scally folded his arms in disgust. "Here we go," he griped. The announcer continued. "Taking you back to 1976 with a song that helped win Rocky the Academy Award." The sideline manager did a double take. "Song? Frank Stallone." As the hit 70s song Take You Back kicked in, Frank Stallone, not Sylvester, danced his way toward the ring. He was at least sporting his brother's iconic look, but still. "Frank Stallone?" Scally shouted in disbelief. "What the hell is this crap? Is something wrong, Scally?" Sayo asked, immediately concerned for her little man. "I'm going down there!" "That's what's wrong." The scrawny tornado stormed toward the ring. They were in the nosebleed section, so it would at least take him some time. "Can you get us some popcorn?" Sayo called out, suddenly less concerned. The Brawl contingent, also surprised by the Stallone misdirection, looked to each other and shrugged. As Frank Stallone entered the ring, Ross decided it was time to break the situation down for the televised audience. In case some of you at home were expecting to see the actual Rocky, Sylvester Stallone is busy finalizing Expendables 4 for Cannes and couldn't make it tonight. "I hear it's up for the Palme d'Or, which is a rarity for an action film," Schiavone added. Ross nodded to his partner. "You never know with those French." "Good luck, Lish," Frank Stallone said with an extended hand. Joeylicious shook with the fellow Italian. "Thanks, Frank. You know, you're a handsome man." The underrated singer laughed, obviously realizing how much they looked alike. "Takes one to know one." Michael Buffer brought the mic back up to his lips. The anticipation was palpable. "Now coming to the ring." The crowd immediately went wild. At exactly 6 feet and 227 pounds, you know him simply as the demo god Le Champion, the founder of the Learning Tree, Chris Jericho. The announcer was distracted by something he heard in his earpiece, and the arena cheers halted. "Excuse me, Christoph Jericho," again his earpiece interrupted. "Actually, it's just plain Christoph," he finally shouted to the Garden contingent. After a moment of confusion, the crowd reverted back into their frenzy mode as a golden throne was carried toward the ring. Of course, Christoph, looking especially flamboyant with his long teased hair and colorful regal attire, was sitting on top of the royal chair. The itty-bitty bonsai tree that David Coverdale gave him was cradled in his arms like a newborn. "Here he is," Ross exclaimed, "and this is a new look for Le Champion." "I love it," Schiavone cooed enthusiastically. "Christoph is the bastard child of an 80s rock star and Caligula." "Hey, gay is the new straight." "That's not what I meant." "Is that a tiny flower he's holding?" Ross asked, slightly bewildered. Schiavone peered his eyes. "I believe that's a plant. Maybe it's a hybrid." Joeylicious is in for a long night either way. Christoph smugly dismounted his throne and delicately put his precious bonsai tree down in the corner of the ring.
"You better not step on this, my lovelies,"
he warned, not only his opponent, but his opponent's older twin as well.
I may have to give you a shove.
The man likes his tiny trees, Frank Stallone muttered to Joeylicious. The Italian Dream shook his head. Ridiculous. Michael Buffer stepped back into the middle of the ring for one final introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it has just come to my attention that we have another special guest here with us tonight. Who could this be now? Ross wondered with exaggerated emphasis. You got me, Schiavone simply said. The crowd waited anxiously. He's a 16-time world champion, Buffer continued. What? No way, Schiavone shouted. You know him as the Nature Boy. Yes way, Ross confirmed. Ric Flair. And much to the crowd's delight, Ric Flair, the golden god of wrestling, made his grand entrance.
Woo!
Flair shouted gleefully, announcing his arrival with his signature battle cry. Schiavone could hardly contain his surprise. The Nature Boy just had knee surgery. He's off the slab already? It was only a minimally invasive scope, Ross explained. Oh, good to know. Ric Flair gingerly climbed into the ring and pointed at Christoph.
Save those trees, my man.
You're next, darling,
The current champ teased.
Don't start cashing in those social security checks just yet.
Whoa, down, boy.
Christoph faked a punch, and the Nature Boy faked a block before turning away and facing the challenger.
I like your style, Joeylicious.
Flair complimented.
You bring the violence now, you hear?
In awe of the Golden God, Joeylicious dropped to his knees and genuflected. It was a bit much for the wrestling legend, who laughed off the awkward gesture. Apparently, Joeylicious has mistaken Flair for a king, Ross stated. Lish, get up, Frank Stallone insisted. Real Italians don't genuflect. It's the kind of respect he should be giving the current champ, Schiavone demanded. The Italian Dream, snapping out of his daze, remembered why he was there and stood. No such respect will be given, Ross concluded. Frank Stallone, Flair, and Michael Buffer stepped out of the ring, and the calm before the storm briefly settled the buzzing crowd. Still a bundle of nerves, but now unable to watch, Mrs. Casada literally put her hands over her face. She had seen the aftermath of many of her son's beatings over the years, but never had she witnessed one live and in the flesh. Anne-Marie looked over at the loving mother and understood. Having completely fallen for her Italian Dream again, she had a pit in her stomach as well, and there would be many such pits in the future. Meanwhile, Father Randazzo just did what he did best, he prayed. Chapter 28. Whose title match is this anyway? Ding ding ding, and the match began. And here we go, cried Jim Ross. Joeylicious and Christoph circled the ring as they sized each other up. Two alpha males, mano a mano, the world championship belt on the line, the winner predetermined. They were just about to lock up, until the sound of a raucous erupting froze them. Who else could it have been but Scally, screaming something inaudible at Frank Stallone from just outside the ring? Yes, the blonde menace still had his beer. And yes, a drop had still not been spilt. Frank Stallone, having no idea who the intruder was, yelled something back. Both managerial rivals were unmiked, so it was difficult to make out what they were arguing about, but it could easily be imagined. Who's this drunk that just wandered in from the stands? Tony Schiavone asked incredulously. Ross peered his eyes. He may be drunk, but I believe that's Scully, the usual manager of Joeylicious. Obviously, jealousy has sunk in. Would somebody call security and get this nut out of here? Frank Stallone isn't backing down. I hope he pounds on this Scully, Schiavone added, saliva practically dripping from his mouth. I know I would. And just like that, Scally and Frank Stallone went at it like mad dogs. Schiavone, you just got your wish, Ross whooped. Mayhem has erupted outside the ring. Joeylicious and Christoph were flabbergasted. The unhinged and unscripted spectacle was completely stealing their thunder.
Joseph, put a leash on your rabid minion down there,
Christoph shouted.
He's cramping your style. Mine too, I'm afraid.
Scally, you idiot, Joeylicious cried. Frank Stallone was pummeling Scally, but the little runt still managed to hold on to his beer. This is my day, the Italian Dream, who was in the middle of an Italian nightmare, continued. Stop fighting Frank Stallone. Tell Frank Stallone to stop fighting me, Scally yelled back, shifting the blame as always. In fairness to the scrawny Irishman, the lesser-known Stallone really needed to be sedated at this point to end things. The Brawl contingent in Tiny's corporate suite fully enjoyed the imp's ass-kicking as they pointed and laughed. The preoccupied human Butterball even ignored an MSG staff member who offered him more food to devour. "Toss the beer, so you can defend yourself with both hands," Joeylicious offered, wishing he had taught Scally some actual moves in all the years of practicing on him. "What are you, crazy?" the Lush bemoaned. "This is a large." His one and only client turned his attention to the other more ruthless manager. "Frank, show mercy. You didn't hear what he said about my last album," Frank Stallone shot back. Joeylicious was taken aback by the surprising news. "What last album? You're still recording?" Needless to say, mercy was not granted. Ross bobbed and weaved from the broadcasting booth as if he was taking part in the extracurricular fisticuffs himself. "Boy, I don't think we've seen Frank Stallone beat on anyone like this since he beat on Mickey Rourke in Barfly." Schiavone nodded in agreement. "Good film. A very underrated performance by Faye Dunaway, by the way." His TV partner momentarily held still as he thought on that. "That's right, she was in that." He then continued to shadowbox. Christoph leaned over the ropes toward his own guest manager and pointed emphatically at the violent distraction.
"Rick, darling, get in there and break that up, would you?"
Whoa.
Flair protested.
They didn't pay me enough for that, Your Highness. I'm still recovering from surgery.
It was a mere procedure.
Ross took notice of the former and current champions. And now Christoph and Flair are conversing. "They might as well bust out the tea and crumpets until this management squabble is settled," Schiavone bemoaned. "This is a strange beginning to a match that hasn't even really begun." Joeylicious was desperate. His once-in-a-lifetime spotlight was dimming, and he could feel the curtain coming down as well. "What do we do?" he pleaded to Christoph. "I can't get them to stop." The champ punched his whining opponent dead in the face, staggering the Italian dream.
"I guess we just get started then,"
he said, abandoning his so-called British accent, and he would continue to abandon his new persona for the remainder of the match. But even as the real match truly began inside the ring, the crowd was still torn by the chaos happening outside. "And now the champ and Joeylicious are finally going at it," Ross exclaimed. "Yeah, but this Scully character is still a major distraction," Schiavone countered. Frank Stallone lifted Scally over his head and brutally body slammed him onto the hardwood floor. "At this point, Frank Stallone may be more of a distraction," Ross said, countering the counter. "By the way, I've also just been told that it's Scally, not Scully." "Is that his first or last name?" Schiavone asked. His partner shrugged. "I have no idea." Joeylicious and Jericho were now locked up in the middle of the ring. "Is this working?" the naive challenger asked. "Is the crowd watching us now?"
"I don't know who's watching what,"
the champ shouted. He then kicked Joeylicious in the stomach, and the Tower of Power hunched over in pain.
"Just keep fighting."
"Okay, sure," his injured opponent muttered, the wind knocked out of him. Suddenly, Washi and Seo ran in and joined the fray happening outside the ring. "Who are these broads now?" Schiavone cried. The seasoned announcer was beside himself. In all his years, he had never seen such unabridged mayhem. Washi and Seo desperately tried to pull Frank Stallone off their beloved Scally. Ross peered at the new combatants. It appears that two Asian women, very attractive, I might add, have come to Scally's rescue. Again, Joeylicious and Jericho froze and became spectators. Sensing something familiar, Mrs. Casada finally removed her hands from her face. "I know those girls," she cried, pointing at the ongoing fiasco. Father Randazzo looked up to the heavens and gave the sign of the cross. "This is a travesty of epic proportions," Schiavone declared. "This sideshow has completely taken the spotlight off a title match." The discombobulated referee was wandering around the ring, being pulled from what should have been the fight to the actual fight outside the ropes. Ross took notice of the bewildered man in zebra stripes. "Even the ref doesn't know which end is up, or he may call this thing. And Joeylicious should be disqualified if he does," his disgruntled partner bemoaned. "It's his managers that are causing this mess, along with two Asian beauties, but I agree." Frank Stallone shook off Washi and Seo and went back at Scally with even more reckless abandonment. Joeylicious could only shake his head at the tragic comedy. Ridiculous. Finally, when hope was all but lost, Ric Flair came out of nowhere and whacked Frank Stallone over the head with a folding chair, knocking him unconscious. The entire arena held their collective breath.
Okay, so we're good?
The Nature Boy said casually to anyone interested. "We're perfect." A breathless Scally answered. He gave Flair a thumbs up before collapsing to the floor. Of course, his beer still hadn't spilled. Not a drop. All right, Nate, Joeylicious cheered. Way to go. Jericho drop-kicked the distracted challenger to the canvas, and the title match began. Again. The Nature Boy saves the day, Ross lauded. About time, Schiavone still griped. And we are officially underway. Finally, the main event was in full swing as if nothing else had actually gotten in its way, and, for a while at least, the fight was tit for tat. But even though Jericho allowed Joeylicious to land some vicious and delicious blows, including a few signature moves, it never felt like the champ was in jeopardy. Regardless, the Italian Dream was living his. He knew he was making an impressive showing, and the crowd was eating it up. It was more than he could ever ask for, or expect. The Brawl contingent, also eating it up, exchanged high fives to each other as the MSG staff brought another plate of mozzarella sticks to the gentle giant footing the bill. Tiny's tuxedo looked as if it had been through a paintball war, his jacket littered with blue cheese, sauces, and other condiments of unknown origin. Scally even came to without the need of smelling salts, and properly rooted on his boy. All the while, Ross and Schiavone commented on the epic proceedings accordingly. Finally, the two worthy ring combatants locked up for what appeared to be the last time. Even the crowd could feel that the end was near, their wrestling appetites more than sated. Not only did they get their money's worth, but an introduction to a blonde maniac named Scully, or something to that effect, was especially thrilling. Maybe the evil imp would become the next Mouth of the South Jimmy Hart. They could dream, couldn't they?
Good match, Licious,
Jericho said through clenched teeth. Absent was his usual pretentiousness.
I didn't think you had it in you.
Thanks, champ, Joeylicious grunted in appreciation. But there was something nagging at him. What happened to Benny Hill, the former Brit scoffed.
Never mind that. I'm going to stun you one more time in the corner before I end it with my Judas effect,
he explained, moving on to what was paramount. I'm ready, his challenger proclaimed. Jericho grabbed Joeylicious by the back of his head in an effort to slam it against the turnbuckle. Watch the hair, the Italian with the L'Oreal highlights cried. Unfortunately for the champ, he picked the corner of the ring where he had placed his precious bonsai tree and accidentally stepped on the tiny piece of nature. Losing his balance, he didn't slam his opponent's head against the turnbuckle, he slammed it into the metal ring post behind it instead. The back of Joeylicious's head violently jerked back and connected with Jericho's forehead, and the two 21st century gladiators fell to the canvas unconscious. But because the Italian Dream was in front, he actually fell backwards on top of the champ. Oh my God, Schiavone shouted. What just happened? I think they're both unconscious, Ross dramatically surmised. It's got to be a draw then. I don't know, maybe not? Scally, pleading for the ref's attention, continuously banged on the canvas. His shoulders are down, he yelled, pointing emphatically at the clear evidence. You gotta count him out. The ref looked around nervously, clueless on what to do. This was not the preordained verdict he was informed about. What's that Scully yelling about? Schiavone asked incredulously. Scally, Ross corrected. Lish is on top of him, the alert manager continued emphatically. Count to 3. Mrs. Casada, Anne-Marie, and Father Randazzo all looked to the ref as well. Could this actually be happening? Scally's right, Ross declared. Christoph's shoulders are pinned, and Lish is on top. Impossible, Schiavone protested. The champ can't lose his belt like this. Do it, Scally pleaded, still on the ref's case. Finally, the ref, apparently with no other choice, hit the mat and counted to 3. Whoa! Scally screamed, after taking a quick peek back at Ric Flair behind him. He leapt into the ring and blissfully celebrated all around. People at home, the impossible has just happened, Ross happily announced. No, Schiavone decried. Foul! Disqualification! His partner with the signature cowboy hat stood up and brought the broadcast mic to his lips. We have a new champion! The Italian Dream has come true! The crowd went ballistic as Mrs. Casada, Anne-Marie, and Father Randazzo hugged each other and anyone else in the vicinity that they could get their arms around. It was the miracle of all miracles, and they wanted to share the wealth. The Brawl contingent just stared down at the proceedings in complete shock. Tiny was frozen with a chicken wing sticking out of his mouth. Michael Buffer re-entered the ring with the championship belt, and Scally immediately snatched it from the announcer. The blonde menace then went to lift the unconscious hand of Joeylicious in triumph, but he realized that both of his own hands were already occupied, the belt in one, his large styrofoam cup of beer in the other. What to do? Of course, Scally did what only Scally would do. He tossed the belt aside and lifted his lifelong pal's arm to the heavens, along with his styrofoam cup of beer. "Yo, Washi, yo, Sayo, we did it," he proudly declared to the cameras. Washi and Sayo ran into the ring and showered the imp with hugs and kisses. Joeylicious, a.k.a. Joey Casada, had no idea what just hit him. Literally. Epilogue. The Madison Square Garden press room was abuzz as Scally, smoking a victory cigar, sat comfortably with his feet up on a long table fielding post-match questions from reporters. He may have been battered and bruised, but he was loving the attention. Every minute of it. ESPN was the first to stand and be recognized. "Scully, how does it feel? It's Scally," Pro Wrestling Magazine interrupted, stating the name correctly for the record. "Oh," ESPN said sheepishly, taken aback by the more knowledgeable member of the press. "I apologize." Scally blew smoke circles in the direction of the misinformed TV reporter. ESPN shook off the rough start and refocused. "Scally, how does it feel to be the brains behind a championship team?" "It feels like a cold brew going down on a hot day," the confident manager described, savoring the moment even more. "Why aren't you drinking now?" Fox Sports asked suspiciously. Scally lifted up a fresh beer from under the table. "Who says I'm not?" He chugged it, crushed the styrofoam cup, and belched. "Next question." Pro Wrestling Magazine raised a hand and was recognized. "Your strategy heading into the match? Anything you'd like to share?" "My strategy was to win," the elusive imp said simply. "What's your strategy when you wake up in the morning?" Pro Wrestling Magazine was surprised by the curt, Bill Belichick-like response. Hey, that's okay. It's why you're down there and I'm up here. But it was a long road to fame and fortune, let me tell you. There were barbed wire fences, lava pits, mutant dogs, and racism to overcome." The entire press room paused at that. "Racism?" Fox Sports asked skeptically, clearly not following. "I'm Irish," Scally explained. "We're basically the blacks of Europe. You can look that up. You were born in Brooklyn." Semantics. ESPN cleared his throat in an effort to move on from the sudden awkwardness that settled in the room. "What will your relationship with Frank Stallone be like, moving forward?" Scally looked to his immediate left. "Frank, would you like to answer that?" Frank Stallone, sitting with an ice pack over his head, was in no condition or mood to properly contribute. "You're doing fine." "Thanks, Frank." The blonde menace took a long puff from his cigar and reflected. "You know, me and the lesser Stallone here had a beef in the beginning, but it's all good in the wrestling hood. Ain't that right, Frankie boy?" "Sure." At that point, the Italian singer was open to being euthanized. Most of the press felt the same way. "Scally, is there any chance your one and only client, the champion, will be able to take a question or two?" Pro Wrestling Magazine asked hopefully. The rest of the press perked up again. "I don't know," Scally admitted. He looked to his immediate right. "Joe, you awake yet?" Joey, still unconscious, was sitting face down with the championship belt acting as a golden pillow between him and the table. "That's a negative," his True Blue manager casually announced. Riding in a stretch limo, the Brooklynites were celebrating in style as they made their way home. There was Scally, of course, Washi, Sayo, the Brawl contingent, Mrs. Casada, Anne-Marie, Father Randazzo, Joey, and even Frank Stallone was along for the ride. Yes, the Italian dream was still in the middle of one, unconscious, but with the belt wrapped around his waist. "Woo!" Scally whooped. "Woo!" Milkshake agreed with equal gusto. "Woo!" Una Granada shouted as well. "Woo!" Lou Rosati said matter-of-factly, face completely deadpan. The scrawny blonde ringleader cracked open a fresh can of beer that exploded everywhere, and Mrs. Casada immediately shot the lush down with her laser beam eyes. "What?" Scally protested, knowing exactly what that look meant. "You've had quite enough," Mrs. Casada reminded him. "But we're not home yet. I'm still allowed to drink outside the apartment." "We have other ladies in the car?" Washi and Sayo chuckled at the older woman's more than generous comment. "They don't care," Scally shot back. Mrs. Casada rethought her argument. "We have another mother in the car." The cockeyed manager looked to Anne-Marie, who could only shrug. Tiny snatched the beer and downed it himself, before crushing the can against his forehead. "Woo!" he exclaimed, even more emphatically than the others. "What is all this wooing about?" Father Randazzo asked in all sincerity. "It's how we wrestlers celebrate, Padre," Una Granada explained. "That's news to me," the good priest admitted. "They're just children acting out," Mrs. Casada clarified, dismissing any other reason for the silly outbursts. "Rich children," Scally declared, clarifying her clarification. "Woo!" Washi and Sayo cheered in unison, seconding their little man's motion. Mrs. Casada shook her head. She could already see the corruptive nature of fame taking hold of the previously corrupt. Hopefully her son would handle the good fortune with some humility when he finally came to. Chris Jericho hung his head in shame as he climbed aboard David Coverdale's luxury vessel, which was docked on the east side of Manhattan. The prodigal son was carrying his squashed bonsai tree, which looked even sadder than him, but the flamboyant front man waited with open arms.
Now, my boy, there's no need for such glumness,"
Coverdale cooed. He hugged the ex-champ and patted him on the back.
Could you ever forgive me, Lord Coverdale?
Jericho asked hesitantly, slipping out of his British persona as his usual voice crept back in.
I abandoned my British persona in the middle of the match.
And you paid for that dearly. But I've already forgiven you.
You have?
Of course I have.
The proper Brit stepped back and wiped fresh tears from the wannabe's face.
It's about time you dropped this whole wrestling nonsense anyway,
he continued.
I'm going to announce a reunion tour with Whitesnake in the morning, and it would be an honor if your fuzzy naval band joined us as our opening act.
It's Fozzie,
Jericho said, correcting the superior being.
Oh, Fozzie Naval, my bad,
Coverdale clarified. Or so he thought.
We shall sail the world together, bringing glorious head-banging music to all that desire it.
I would like that,
the disgraced wrestler admitted, his British accent suddenly returning.
And I would love it,
the otherworldly singer said, one-upping his prodigy.
Now come with me below. Joyce and Lola are still aboard, and we shall celebrate this wonderful news together.
Coverdale put his arm around Jericho as they walked.
Theo left?
Jericho asked, sincerely hoping that he hadn't.
Don't fret, he'll be right back,
Coverdale answered reassuringly.
Unfortunately, we ran out of booze, so he's just making a run. Come now, we shall resurrect our little bonsai friend as well.
And the two fine-feathered friends disappeared below deck with a severely damaged, itty-bitty 400-year-old tree cradled in their arms. The stretch limo was parked in front of the Casada apartment building as Scally and Frank Stallone carried Joey out. Mrs. Casada stood by, all set to start opening doors for the two rival managers helping her son. Father Randazzo rolled down a window from inside the limo. Are you sure you don't need me to administer last rites? Scally scoffed. He's fine. Anne-Marie rolled down another window. Not even a trip to the hospital as a precaution. I could sit with him. Not to worry, sweetie, Mrs. Casada said reassuringly. This isn't our first trip to the rodeo. You just get home to your little girl. I'm sure she misses her mommy. Scally lost his grip, and the top half of Joey's body bounced off the ground. The mishap would have been extremely painful for the brand new champion if he was actually awake. Instead, it was just painful. Watch it, you idiot, Mrs. Casada barked at the scrawny culprit. Frank, come on, Scally deflected, passing the buck as always. Look what you made me do. Scally and Frank Stallone lugged Joey into his bedroom and dropped him on the bed. Of course, the Italian dream was still out like a light. Scally, who had been struggling with the workload, exhaled. Okay, Frank, that about does it. Washi and Sayo entered hurriedly and shut the door. I think we're in the clear, Sayo announced excitedly. The old lady went to her room. So get those clothes off, numbnuts, Washi added, threatening the inexperienced blonde. Scally gulped, clearly intimidated. Meanwhile, Frank Stallone was taken aback by the intriguing exchange. I'm sorry. What's happening now? The rapid-firing sex machine quickly recovered and forcefully escorted the Italian singer to the door. If the party ain't over, I don't mind sticking around. Party's over, Scally insisted as he shoved him out the door. For you! He turned back to Washi and Sayo. The three sex addicts paused momentarily, and then tore at each other's clothes like rabid hyenas. Adding to the romantic mood from the other side of the door, Frank Stallone began to sing his rocky hit, Take You Back.
Take you back. Do, 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 do.
We don't need to be serenaded, Frank, Scally quickly protested. Good night. Both Frank Stallone and his song faded away. With the cumbersome vocalist officially out of the way, the impish deviant remembered that there was still another problem to deal with. He went over to the bed, yanked up the sheets from underneath Joey, and rolled them off. There was a thump as the comatose wrestler hit the floor. Scally refocused on the Asian beauties. Okay, where were we? Washi and Seo closed in on him. But then Joey suddenly sat up like a vampire rising from its coffin at sundown. Ma? He asked groggily. Go back to sleep, Joe, his lifelong pal casually suggested. We're about to consummate our relationship. Finally, Washi added. She was done playing games. But you're welcome to join us, Seo offered pleasantly. No, he's not welcome, Scally hissed. The bed only fits 3. I just had the weirdest dream. Joey began as he reflected, and somehow Frank Stallone was involved. That wasn't a dream, his manager clarified, feeling it was only fair to tell him. You're the champ. The champ stood up and shook out the cobwebs. Isn't the fight tonight? He suddenly noticed the 2 half-naked females. Oh, hi, Washi and Seo, he said matter-of-factly. Nice underwear. Wait, why are you girls in my room? I already told you I was spoken for. Lish, enough, Scally shot back. Do you see what you're wearing around your waist? Yeah, it's the World Championship belt, Joey stated simply. What about it? And why would you be wearing such a thing? Because I'm the champ, obviously. And 3 cheers for that, the preoccupied manager said, half-mockingly. Now lie back down or take a walk so I can get busy here. The wrestler with the dream started to put the pieces together. Did you just say I was the champ? No, you just said it. So I beat Jericho? Kind of, Scally answered, resisting the urge to get into specifics. But you are the champ. Joey finally let that sink in. I'm the champ, he muttered to himself in awe, and then he passed out again, crashing to the floor. Scally shrugged and opened his arms to his girls. Let the sexual healing begin. Suddenly, the sound of fast-approaching footsteps forced the sex addicts to scramble for their clothes. Obviously, Joey's fall made too much noise. Mrs. Casada stormed in with a purpose and immediately spotted the blonde menace only half-dressed. I should have known, she shouted. Again, Scally gulped, but for a much different reason this time. Mrs. Casada grabbed a pillow and repeatedly beat the perverted imp over the head with it as she chased him around the room. Washi and Seo grabbed pillows of their own and did the same, exercising their romantic frustrations in the process. Eventually, Scally just curled into a defensive ball and prayed for mercy. Mercy never came. The end. Or just the beginning.